I cannot tell a lie. Ask not what your country can do for you. Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. Today, a new and surreal addition to the pantheon of America's most famous presidential statements. Today, wow, they are going to arrest me. Can't believe this is happening.
President Trump, will you come speak to us?
The ex-president surrenders. He's arrested, booked, fingerprinted, criminally charged with 34 felonies in a Manhattan courthouse.
These are felony crimes in New York State, no matter who you are.
Prosecutors say he ran a criminal scheme to conceal damaging information and unlawful activity from American voters before the 2016 election. Former President Trump pleads not guilty.
He's frustrated. He's upset.
Tonight, the substance of the case. The people versus Donald Trump. Joy Reid, Nicole Wallace, Chris Hayes, Lawrence O'Donnell, Ari Melber, Alex Wagner, Stephanie Ruhle, all here for MSNBC's special coverage of the first ever criminal indictment of a former president of the United States. Good evening, and thank you for being with us here tonight. I am Rachel Maddow here at MSNBC headquarters in New York, along with Lawrence O'Donnell and Joy Reid and Nicole Wallace and Chris Hayes. We're going to be joined by more of our closest colleagues over the course of this evening tonight as part of this special coverage. We know that you have every choice in the world tonight as to where to get your news about this historic event. That makes us all the more grateful that you are here together with us tonight. So here's how it went. We just got the transcript, so we know exactly how it went. The clerk, calendar number 1, indictment 71543 of 2023. People of the state of New York versus Donald J. Trump. Appearances. Prosecutor, Christopher Conroy for the people, Your Honor. And judge with me are Catherine McCaw, Matthew Colangelo, Susan Hoffinger, and Becky Mangold. The judge, good afternoon. Defense lawyers, good afternoon, Your Honor. Todd Blanche for President Trump. Susan Nicholas for President Trump as well. Once again, Joseph Tacopina for President Donald J. Trump. The judge, good afternoon. This matter is on for arraignment. Anything that we need to address before we conduct the arraignment? Prosecutor, not from the people, Your Honor. The judge, defense? Defense lawyer, no, Your Honor. The judge, well, let's arraign Mr. Trump. The clerk, Donald J. Trump, the grand jury of New York County, has filed indictment 71543 of 2023, charging you with the crimes of 34 counts of falsifying business records in the first degree. How do you plead to this indictment? Guilty or not guilty? Defendant Trump, not guilty. The one-term Donald Trump presidency was, of course, marked by more than its share of turmoil and scandal. The president paying out a $25 million fraud settlement related to his business just as he took office. His family charity shut down as a fraud and subjected to multi-million-dollar fines. The president himself subjected to a lengthy, high-profile special counsel investigation over his campaign's links to a foreign adversary intervening on his behalf in his first election. The president impeached for soliciting help from another foreign government for his re-election effort. Then he was impeached again, which is a record, for attempts to overturn the result when he lost his re-election effort, up to and including inciting a 1,000-strong mob attack on Congress by his supporters, a physical attack on Congress that left in its wake Americans injured, Americans dead, and more than 1,000 Americans criminally charged. When Congress launched a landmark investigation of that attack, we brought you special coverage here on MSNBC of the televised hearings of that investigation. We brought you the hearings live. We brought you primetime recaps each night they aired. Well, now tonight, we're back for special coverage again, as history of the heaviest kind is made again. This time, it's the arrest and indictment of the former president, the first time any president or former president has been subjected to the criminal legal process in this country. We know the coverage today, frankly, the coverage since last week when we first learned this indictment was coming. We know that it at times has felt a bit like a circus. It has at times felt like 100 parts speculation to every part substance. But today we got the substance of the legal case against the former president, and it is interesting. It was surprising in some ways. It is legally both intricate and very blunt. And whether or not you were able to watch the coverage of the president's arraignment and arrest today as it unfolded as a real spectacle, you're forgiven if you didn't watch it as it unfolded. Tonight in this special coverage, we're here to cover what happened, what prosecutors are charging him with, and how we think this is going to work from here on out. So first, let's start with the charges. Here's New York District Attorney Alvin Bragg.
Earlier this afternoon, Donald Trump was arraigned on a New York Supreme Court indictment returned by a Manhattan grand jury on 34 felony counts of falsifying business records in the first degree. Under New York state law, it is a felony to falsify business records with intent to defraud and an intent to conceal another crime. That is exactly what this case is about. 34 false statements made to cover up other crimes. These are felony crimes in New York State, no matter who you are. We cannot and will not normalize serious criminal conduct. Why did Donald Trump repeatedly make these false statements? The evidence will show that he did so to cover up crimes relating to the 2016 election. Donald Trump, executives at the publishing company American Media Incorporated, Mr. Cohen, and others agreed in 2015 to a catch and kill scheme. That is, a scheme to buy and suppress negative information to help Mr. Trump's chance of winning the election. As part of this scheme, Donald Trump and others made 3 payments to people who claimed to have negative information about Mr. Trump. To make these payments, they set up shell companies, and they made yet more false statements, including, for example, in AMI, American Media Incorporated's business records. One of the 3 people that they paid to keep quiet was a woman named Stormy Daniels. Less than 2 weeks before the presidential election, Michael Cohen wired $130,000 to Stormy Daniels' lawyer. That payment was to hide damaging information from the voting public. The participant scheme was illegal. The scheme violated New York election law, which makes it a crime to conspire to promote a candidacy by unlawful means. The $130,000 wire payment exceeded the federal campaign contribution cap, and the false statements in AMI's books violated New York law.
District Attorney Alvin Bragg speaking today, explaining the nature of the case, the nature of this 34-count felony indictment against former President Donald Trump. Now, the indictment itself is bare bones. It lays out in just the facts, ma'am, list style each of the 34 felony counts that Trump is facing for allegedly falsifying business records. Each one of those 34 counts gets about a paragraph. Each paragraph has just about the same information in it. The statement of facts, however, that accompanies that bare bones indictment, that spells things out more like a movie script. But somewhere in between is this. And this breaks it down not like a list and not like a movie script, but more like a TikTok instructional video about making weird food using things that don't at first glance seem edible. The prosecutor had 3 big posters behind him at his press conference today, laying it all out in hard to miss terms in case you are a pictorial learner. This is one of those 3 posters, and you can see the headline there at the top, Catch and Kill Scheme to Influence the 2016 Election. And as it shows in very simple terms, the allegation from the prosecutors here is that this catch and kill scheme was hatched in August 2015 at a meeting at Trump Tower. You'll remember that Trump announced his candidacy for president in June 2015. A few weeks later, in August 2015, according to prosecutors, he met at Trump Tower with Michael Cohen, his lawyer, and the embarrassingly named David Pecker, the the head of a company that owns the National Enquirer supermarket tabloid. Because I'm 8 years old, I can't say pecker without laughing. And so I have to come up with weird euphemisms and sentence structure to avoid saying it more than once.
It's an objectively funny name.
It's an amazing part of the story.
I apologize. I should be bigger than this. I just turned 50, and I can't get through a sentence with the word pecker in it without turning this color. Anyway, at this meeting in August 2015, the National Enquirer guy, as we'll call him, agreed to help with Trump's campaign, saying that he would act as eyes and ears for the campaign by looking out for negative stories about Trump and alerting Michael Cohen before those stories were published. The National Enquirer guy also agreed to publish negative stories about Trump's competitors for the election. So that's what prosecutors spelled out today in the statement of facts about this August 2015 meeting where the scheme was hatched. What they say to the court in this statement of facts is that the scheme paid off first with a story we had all forgotten. It paid off first with a Trump Tower doorman who was making allegations, apparently, that Trump had fathered a child out of wedlock. Now, according to prosecutors today, the National Enquirer company paid this doorman $30,000 to keep quiet about that allegation without even investigating if it was true. They just paid him $30,000, regardless of whether it was true, in order to keep his mouth shut ahead of the election. Interestingly, prosecutors then go out of their way later in the statement of facts to tell the court that the company eventually did investigate the story and decided that it wasn't, in fact, true. I feel like reading it, it was nice of them to put that in there in terms of Donald Trump's reputation. But that doesn't change the fact that as part of this alleged scheme to catch and kill negative stories about Trump ahead of the election, the company did, in fact, pay this guy off to the tune of $30,000 to keep him quiet so as to help Trump's chances in the election. Prosecutors also said today that the company, the National Enquirer company, also booked that payment to the doorman in their financial records in such a way that was false and illegal. That ends up being important in just a moment. According to prosecutors, though, the scheme, the catch and kill scheme hatched between the guy whose name I'm embarrassed to say and Michael Cohen and Donald Trump, that scheme paid off first with the doorman story. It paid off next for Trump with the National Enquirer company making another payment to keep another story quiet that might have hurt Trump in the election. In the second instance, it was a $150,000 payment to this woman whose name is Karen McDougal. In both of those instances, prosecutor Alvin Bragg said today that the bookkeeping around those payments, the payment to the doorman, the payment to Karen McDougal, resulted in false business statements being made on the books of the parent company that owns the National Enquirer. Now, that ends up being important to all of our understanding here and to the eventual fate of Donald Trump, because that factor ends up being important to the crimes, the alleged crimes being charged against Trump as felonies. The contention from prosecutors today, which we did not know was coming in this exact way, the contention from prosecutors today is that this overall scheme was a violation of New York election law, because New York election law makes it a crime to conspire to promote a candidacy by unlawful means. And what prosecutors said today is that part of the unlawful means alleged here is that this company paid off all these people with weird sex stories about Donald Trump and then recorded it in their business records like they were buying Post-it notes or something. They're saying that was a crime. That's why this was an overall criminal scheme under New York law. That's why these false business records that Trump oversaw and insisted upon can be charged as felonies. That's why, at least theoretically, he should be facing jail time. But back to the scheme. First, we had the payoff to keep the doorman quiet. Then we had the payoff to keep Karen McDougal quiet. Prosecutors said there was then one more person they paid to keep quiet. And that, of course, was Stormy Daniels, America's sweetheart. As prosecutors laid it out, by this point in the scheme, the National Enquirer company was getting sick of throwing money down this filthy well. So when it came time in the last few days before the election to pay off yet another person to keep quiet with a weird sex story about Donald Trump, the presidential candidate, Mr. Trump himself, and his own supposed business, they were left to take care of the money this time on their own without that much help from the National Enquirer. And that's where we got the Stormy Daniels payment. And that's where we got a deeply stupid Rube Goldberg scheme that was supposed to make it seem like they were doing something other than paying Stormy Daniels to keep quiet before the election. But anybody who looked at it for more than 10 seconds could tell that's what they were doing. And that is where we got the enumerated receipts today for 34 different allegedly false business records, including the additional aggravating factor, which is the detailed summary of how they structured the Stormy Daniels reimbursement payments to Michael Cohen to look like something other than reimbursement payments, so they could deceive and therefore cheat the taxman while also committing this other crime. And the deceit of the taxman, the alleged tax-purposed restructuring of these payments, is, again, as described by prosecutors, one of the attempted crimes that prosecutors need to be able to point to. So all of this can be charged as a felony instead of just as a misdemeanor. One last point. Here, just to nut this up, from the arraignment today, here's how the lead prosecutor laid it out to the judge, basically to kick off the arraignment today after Trump pled not guilty. He says this: the defendant, Donald J. Trump, falsified New York business records in order to conceal an illegal conspiracy to undermine the integrity of the 2016 presidential election and other violations of election laws. Beginning in about August 2015, the defendant agreed with others to carry out an unlawful plan to identify and suppress negative information that could have undermined his candidacy for president. As part of that plan, a lawyer employed by the Trump Organization made a covert and illegal $130,000 payment at the defendant's direction. The purpose of the payment was to avoid negative attention to the defendant's campaign by suppressing information about an allegedly sexual encounter between defendant and an adult film actress. After the election, defendant reimbursed the lawyer through a series of disguised monthly payments that hid the true nature of the payoff by causing a series of false business records in the records of the Trump Organization here in Manhattan, and even mischaracterized for tax purposes the true nature of the payment. Defendant falsified these New York business records with the intent to defraud, including the intent to commit another crime and to aid and conceal the commission of another crime. This office, he said, has long prioritized protecting the integrity of business records maintained here in New York. When those records are falsified in service of another crime, it's a felony. That's what this defendant did when he falsified business records in order to conceal unlawful efforts to promote his candidacy. And that's why we are here. And that's from the transcript of the arraignment today. Lawrence O'Donnell, watching this unfold today, I know you went and put yourself in the middle of it bodily a little bit.
I did. It was a short walk from where I woke up to the courthouse, and I wanted to go there because from the start, I believed it was going to be a very tame day outside of the courthouse. I never believed there was even the slightest possibility of a big crowd, and I just wanted to go and confirm, and it turns out, yeah, what I was expecting is what happened. I think there were 100, maybe to be generous, 120 Trump supporters out there. To call them protesters, it would actually be taking it a little farther than the way they behaved. Yes. They were quiet. They were polite. I walked among them, just waded right in and, chatted with a few. I don't think they watch this network. So I was not dressed like an anchorman. So there was only one guy who recognized me and followed me around, yelling at me from behind. And this is the important part. He tried to get everyone there to join in attacking me, and not one person would. Not one. Because that's who these people really are. These are not violent. They got the 1,000 already. They've arrested and put in prison many of the 1,000 most violent Trump supporters in the land. So they're not available. And there was a lesson taught to the rest of them in that process who might have those inclinations. And it's New York. And by the way, Donald Trump said, Alvin Bragg shut down New York City. His lawyer in court today told the lie that Lower Manhattan was shut down. Not a bit. Yeah. There was one block that was shut down. The police presence was incredibly light. there and more flexible than I've ever seen them in a gathering of people. And this is a really, really important thing after January 6th. A really important thing. Donald Trump asked for death and destruction today. He asked for it. He told them 2 weeks ago, you've got to come. They didn't come. 2 weeks ago. They didn't come. And this small collection that came today were completely harmless. The guy running around behind me, I couldn't make sense of most of what he was saying, so I couldn't really address him. He just wanted to talk about my vagina. And I'm serious. I'm serious. That was his subject. And I just figured
that's a hard conversation starter.
Trying to convince him that I don't have one would be like trying to convince him that Joe Biden won the presidency. And so I never spoke to him. And you know, it was an otherwise completely pleasant encounter with the Trump press.
Another beautiful day in Lower Manhattan.
You know, it's a good day to you, sir.
I've run into you in the street in other parts of Manhattan before, and I can't say that I can guarantee that wouldn't have eventually happened just on any random Tuesday. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
I really,
a normal day.
I didn't think that you would giggle at Pecker and Lawrence would talk about his vagina.
I know.
So
Look at God. Look at how it turned out. Look at it.
Let's go back in time and give parents a little warning before this show tonight. Let's go back in time. Shall we rewind?
Yeah, it's a warning because he was videoing, so it might show up somewhere on the World Wide Web.
Wow.
You know.
It's amazing.
The thing that I was thinking about today, sort of independent of the circus, once we got the indictment. So there's a few things here. One is the facts are basically established and I think largely uncontested. I mean, there's a few new facts. Pecker saying that the specific line that Trump says, you know, if you could push this off until after the election, then maybe you don't have to pay because it doesn't matter, right?
No,
so
that's with him and Cohen.
I'm sorry, him and Cohen, right?
Stormy Daniels.
So that, you know, that I don't know if we knew that before, but largely the facts are not the question here. I mean, the facts are established. There's the receipts, like
by SDNY.
They've already been
Correct.
pleaded to as part of a federal crime. So the facts are not really in dispute. Everything in terms of the defense is going to be a big set of questions about law, right? About federal preemption, about this sort of doing it as a conspiracy in furtherance of another crime. They don't charge conspiracy, but basically doing this for the purposes of committing another crime, the unlawful help. And the big thing that I just thought of watching him sitting there sullenly, right, at the defense table, is this is a guy who has acted lawlessly his whole life, recklessly with regards to the law, is one of the most notorious litigants in the country, both in suing and being sued, who has never crossed the line from civil to criminal law. And there was something sort of profound about that distinction. I was thinking about this social media meme about what's something that's classy when rich folks do it and trashy when poor folks do it. And they'll be like day drinking, you know? And it's like, oh, you're at the country club. Oh, you're sitting on the stoop drinking a 40, right? It's like if you rob someone of their iPhone, you're in criminal law land. That's $1,000 and you could be charged with a felony. If you don't pay a contractor $20,000, you're just in civil law land. That's where you get your lawyers to figure it out. This guy has spent his whole life not paying people, committing lawless acts that were on the civil side of things, where his lawyers could threaten to sue, where he could draw things out, where he could settle. He crossed over today into the criminal law land. And criminal law land operates traditionally in this society on people who are the most marginalized and the most powerless, and it just grinds them through arraignments like that. And suddenly the guy who used to be the most powerful person in the world is sitting at that table, having been lawless his whole life. Now sitting before a whole different kind of judicial regime.
Yeah, and I think we kind of had a very similar thought, because what I thought about watching this today and watching him is that this is somebody who has always had, if you read Mary Trump's biography of her family, what she talks about is the fact that Donald Trump has always relied on more intelligent, read-in men, powerful men to fix everything. When it was his financial issues, his father would fix it. He would burn money, essentially throw it in the incinerator. The father would give him more. You know, he even got extra money from the father's will because he took it from his siblings. The father's money fixed it. He lost $317 million of his inheritance. Went deep in the hole. The courts fixed it. Yeah. He had lawyers. He had Roy Cohn who could step in and fix everything. The courts were always used to fix his problems. He had Michael Cohen, whose job was to fix this. and he had AMI whose job was to fix this. They agreed. These three entities agreed. Don't worry. All of the dirt in your background will fix it.
Yeah.
So when the doorman comes forward, give him 30 grand, fix it. When the first woman, Karen McDougal, comes forward, no problem, we'll fix it. And then the third one comes along, Stormy Daniels, we'll fix it. But then at some point, the criminal justice system stepped in and said, hey, Michael Cohen, what was this loan, this HELOC for? Oh, he didn't tell the truth to the bank? Felony. Right. And the feds came in and nicked Michael Cohen. And then at the last bit of this filing today in the narrative, they talk about the intimidation campaign to get Cohen to not talk.
Yes, that's right.
Right. They talk about the fact that Cohen was told, just be smart. Stick with us. We're good. Don't waver.
You have friends in high places.
You have friends in high places, but he ends up going down anyway. AMI, second part of the plan. They admit to the feds, this was about trying to fix the election.
Yeah.
So 2 out of the 3 parties went south on him. And now here's Donald Trump alone. Hugo Lowell talked about having covered him a long time. This is the first time Donald Trump had no one who could fix it.
Well,
there's no one to fix it.
Except all of those facts are established by the Southern District of New York. All the facts you just asserted, Michael Cohen's guilt and being a pass-through, it's a crime that Rudy confessed to on live TV. On Hannity. Rudy confessed to that.
That's right.
The facts are established. They're in black and white. They're in Michael Cohen's sentencing document. They say that Trump directed and coordinated a hush money scheme to the 2 women. Doorman guy isn't in there, but the 2 women, McDougal and America's Sweetheart, as you coined her. I mean, the facts are not in dispute. And so when you see the lawyers, Tacopino and the guy meant to sort of class up the legal team, you could just blur their faces and replace them with Cohen in 2016, with Rudy during Mueller, with whoever defended him in impeachment 1, whoever defended him in impeachment 2. It's the same lie, but in this case, the facts were established by his own executive branch of government, the Southern District of New York.
But the law is complicated, and it's more complicated because it's not happening in the Southern District of New York, right? I mean, that's the big sort of the bagel hole in the middle of this whole thing, is that a guy went into SDNY and pleaded to the facts that we hear, right? He did time for them, right? There's a guy
who didn't have the sex and wasn't running for president.
That's exactly who was doing it, right? There's a person, individual one, who shows up in that pleading, right? But Donald Trump is the president, and we know from Jeffrey Berman's account, Southern District of New York, that Bill Barr hated the fact they were doing this. He tries to unwind the Michael Cohen pleading. He chases Berman out, right? Okay. So there's an OLC opinion you can't indict the president, right? So that's not going to happen. And then the presidency turns over, right? And then it's Joe Biden's Justice Department, it's Damian Williams, it's the Southern District of New York. Now, here's the question, right? Because that's the hole at the center. Why is there no case at SDNY? And what I would submit, and I don't know, I'm just saying, there's political calculations everywhere.
Totally.
With all of this.
And not
this idea of like Alvin Bragg's in politics, it's like we're right. There's some calculation happening about like, are we going to go back up the Michael Cohen case
by the way,
at SDNY after the interference?
And that's political. It's not partisan, but it's political.
Right. And this gets to where the 2 of us were complaining in the wonderful office of Nicole. How is it that this prosecutor is stuck doing this job
alone
when it is the Department of Justice's job?
Well,
because they say in this pleading.
Same with Fonnie Willis.
That's right. That this was done in order to protect his campaign for president. And to me, I have to say, the fact that this brother has to deal with it and that system in Georgia has to pick up the pieces and fix the DOJ's lack of accountability and action, this should be a federal prosecution. DOJ dropped the ball.
Let me just say, just as a moment of business here, and then I'll come to you in just 1 second. I need to tell you that right now, the former president himself is making remarks tonight from his home in Florida. As far as we can tell, and what we were prepared for here is that this is basically a campaign speech in which he is repeating his same lies and allegations against his perceived enemies. It is just getting started. So far, he's just giving his normal list of grievances. We don't consider that necessarily newsworthy, and there's a cost to us as a news organization of knowingly broadcasting untrue things. So our deal with you is that we will monitor these remarks. If he does say anything newsworthy, we will turn them around and report on that right away. But for now, just know that it's happening and we're not taking it.
So there's a Michael Cohen issue in the Southern District of New York, and former prosecutors in the Southern District say that their method in a situation like this is that a witness like Michael Cohen has to tell them every bad thing he's ever done in his entire life.
Since birth, yeah.
Michael Cohen refused to do that. And so the Southern District will not put on a case based on someone who refuses to do that full disclosure. I'm going to have Lanny Davis join me at 10 p.m., Michael Cohen's lawyer. I'll ask him about that. I'm not sure what he can say about it. But if Michael Cohen refused to submit to the Southern District's processes for this kind of thing, that is a reason why they could not have brought this case.
We do also have, though, and I was sort of surprised to see this in the statement of facts today, this recitation of a lot of things that are much more about, forgive me, David Pecker and American media and the National Enquirer than they are about Michael Cohen. And so, yes, Mr. Cohen is a very big part of the arrangements around, for example, the Karen McDougal payment. And certainly he is the main mover when it comes to the Stormy Daniels payment. But the overall scheme is very much much about American media and David Pecker as it is about Mr. Cohen. And that ends up being an interesting dynamic given the different types of immunity that were offered at different stages for different types of testimony, including from Weisselberg and from Mr. Pecker.
And there's an argument to be made that the District Attorney Bragg has a better prosecution of these facts than the feds do because he alone has the business records crime. That is not a federal crime. That is not something that they'd be able to bring in the Southern District. So, it's tricky. If Michael Cohen was a full and open, total disclosure cooperator and the Southern District under Merrick Garland still decided not to go forward, I don't get it. But I do understand why we are where we are now with
Can we also make the note that this office, this DA's office, prosecutes this crime all the time? So there's one sense in which the good news about this is that this is a mundane business records crime that is not uncommon and is not uncommon from this prosecutor. So, I mean, his most recent victory against Trump Incorporated, the Trump many little LLCs that make up the Trump Corporation was about business records and tax records, et cetera. So this is something that would happen to anyone. You want to talk about this would happen to anyone that did have the same
today as the bread and butter of their white-collar crime practice.
Absolutely. I will say, though, again, we sort of keep coming, you end up coming back to this sort of like philosophical bedrock of like what the law is, right? Like, what is the law? What does equal justice under law mean? Which is the running story of the entire Trump era. And I think when you read this indictment, right, I think either call is defensible. Like, it's a bubble case. It's not a slam dunk, I don't think. Like, they're going to have, like, some reaches on law.
It feels so much more solid to me today than it did before we saw this indictment, though. I mean,
again, on the facts, but on the law stuff's tricky.
But you need to be able to prove that there were deliberately falsified business records, falsified with intent for a corrupt purpose, and that they were falsified in order to conceal or facilitate the commission of another crime. Today, we got the recitation of the crime and the receipts for all the records. I didn't expect that much. I thought with all the critique that this was such a bubble issue in terms of the law, that it would be much fuzzier, that would be much harder to explain, that we'd be spending 3 or 4 segments trying to walk people through what the connection was that made this a felony. It's blunt.
Yeah.
And Elmer Bragg leans on New York State election law, and he did when he was in his press conference today, lean on it very heavily. So that's one of the things he's linking to move to felony.
And one thing that's very clear is that if you file a business record for an expense in New York is a very tough state to run a business. If you file a record saying that this payment was meant for A, and instead you took that money and went to Disney World with that money, they will come for you. I mean, I'm with you, Rachel, in the sense that this is so straightforward. They created a shell company, used that money to pay McDougal. Then Donald Trump reimburses 9 of those checks came from his own funds. The checks are there. You put them on screen. Like, these facts are not that squishy to me. This seems like a straightforward business records fraud case. It's just that it's a felony because it was in furtherance of this other crime, which feels like it's campaign.
So the facts are there, and the law question is going to be
right. But that question's a big one. I mean, they're going to contest on that, obviously.
I have to interject again because Lawrence O'Donnell apparently has a job that you have to go to.
We're gonna have a 10 o'clock show tonight after.
Will you tell that story again at 10?
No, I can't ever tell it again. No,
please.
Ever again?
You must.
No, but the video.
Well, it's an ephemeral medium.
We might
so
see
it'll-
this.
more appropriate
We
at
might
10.
see this video somewhere on the World Wide Web of the guy yelling to me about that thing that I just couldn't come up with a thing to say about it.
What a time to be alive, America. What a time to be alive. All right, Lawrence, good luck. We will see you at 10 o'clock Eastern time. Ari Melber is going to be with us when our recap of this historic day continues next. We got a lot to get to tonight. Stay with us.
All right, Naima, I need 3 reasons why people should listen to On with Kara Swisher. What have you got?
Okay, first, you interview smart, powerful people like Hillary Clinton, Mark Benioff, and Stacey Abrams. Second, you grill them harder than most people would dare. And third, the podcast will make you think, it'll make you laugh, and it'll make you smarter. How's that?
That's like 5 things, but good enough. On with Kara Swisher, wherever you get your podcasts.
Hey, everybody, it's Savannah Guthrie.
And I'm Hoda Kotb, and we've got some great news to share.
The Today Show is now available wherever you get your podcasts.
Can you believe that? Right now, you can get your daily dose of news and headlines and the day's top interviews from us right here every single morning.
We have what you need to start your day, and it's available every day, wherever you get your podcasts.
So why not subscribe and follow today to start listening?
I'm not going to go chapter and verse into any thinking. What I will say is, I believe the time period you're talking about, I've been in office for a couple of months. The investigation, in my view, was not concluded into the conduct in particular that is the basis for the charges today. Since that time, we've had more evidence made available to the office and an opportunity to meet with additional witnesses. So as I said earlier, I've been doing this for 24 years. I don't bring cases prior to a thorough and rigorous investigation. Now, having done so, the case has been brought.
I do not bring cases prior to a thorough and rigorous investigation, but now, having done so, the case has been brought. New York District Attorney Alvin Bragg speaking today. I want to bring into our conversation our colleague Ari Melber, who's the host of The Beat and MSNBC chief legal correspondent. Also with us throughout the night tonight, Andrew Weissman, who was, of course, one of the senior prosecutors on Robert Mueller's special counsel investigation. He also served as FBI general counsel. Also, Catherine Christian, who is a veteran of the same Manhattan District Attorney's office that brought these felony charges against the former president today. She's a former special assistant DA from that office. Thank you all to our legal firepower here for being here. Andrew and Catherine, let me just start with you guys. We've been pontificating over here at the table here as if we are lawyers, and we absolutely are not. Have we gotten anything wrong, or is there anything important that you think that we are missing in terms of understanding the law here and what we learned?
Well, I was going to start by saying I thought we were at the children's table, and then I noticed this is obviously the adult room.
That's right.
But with all due respect, as they say, I didn't think there was anything wrong. I actually wanted to maybe focus everybody on an issue that is sort of forward-looking. Because one of the things that happened today that I thought was interesting was the time frame going forward. So we're in April, and the next date that the court set is December. And the court made a point of saying that's a considerable amount of time. And it is true that state cases are obviously a little slower for various reasons than a typical federal case, but that's still quite some time. And there were sort of 2 points you could sort of make from that. One is, it is definitely a possibility that there will be what's called a superseding charge. That is, that the financial investigation at the DA's office, which by all accounts is still ongoing and was talked about by DA Vance, the former DA on shows in this network on Sunday, that could be a reason that you didn't see the district attorney really pushing for a faster date, because it was quite some time. And by the same token, you didn't see Donald Trump, if he was innocent, saying, I want an immediate trial. I've been on a case like that 20 years ago. I'm that old. I was on a case called Arthur Anderson, where when we showed up the first day, Arthur Anderson said, we want a speedy trial. And within a matter of a couple months, we were in court on trial because they wanted to clear their name. at that case. So on the one hand, you didn't have Donald Trump saying, you know what, I'm innocent and I want to prove it to the public. On the other hand, that was a sign to me that the DA sort of not pushing for a faster trial meant they may have something else up their sleeve.
Catherine, when you're looking at these discussions, again, you're the expert. You've been there inside this prosecutor's case who brought these charges today. Is there something that you saw today that you either think we're sort of getting the wrong way around or that you saw differently than is generally being observed?
Nothing wrong, but I'll be the one to say that Donald Trump is innocent until proven guilty. So I'll put that out there. These are allegations. I want to go to the statement of facts, which you so clearly said it was like the aha moment. These statement of facts, they're the roadmap that's going to prove Mr. Trump's intent to defraud and his intent to commit or conceal another crime. So it was very important. When I first heard that they get a statement of facts, I didn't understand. Then, of course, I read them. And then that's basically their roadmap. That's what they're saying. This is how we're intended to prove his guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. So it was very important that they include that statement of facts because you have 34 felony counts and they're just the elements and the dates, but it doesn't really give you the meat of the case, and the statement of facts do.
Ari, looking at the relationship between the indictment, the statement, the verbal statement of the district attorney where he explained what was going on. We got a press release from the district attorney's office as well, laying it out kind of in layman's terms. And then that statement of fact that Catherine is describing, they all sort of told the story in a slightly different way. Do you think as sort of a lay audience here and us as hosts trying to understand it, that we're getting it right?
I think we're getting it right. I think if anything, there is a tendency to underestimate how much new information we got. I would love, and if I were practicing on this case, days to sift through it all. We got over 60 pages if you just count the transcript from the proceeding today, which I've now read, and this semi-speaking indictment. What comes through most and why this was a terrible day for Donald Trump is there was a lot of expectation that this was going to be about essentially payments to one woman and that it was going to feel like sex lies and videotape. In fact, it looks more like tabloid Watergate. And I think what comes through here and will be really important, and if anything, sometimes we're too close to all the innards of it, and we remember Mr. Pecker, and we know about Mr. Cohen, and we've interviewed each of them. This was bigger than that, according to the DA. The defendant has rights. The defendant is legally presumed innocent. But you're asking me what the DA is saying? He's saying this is tabloid Watergate. And everything that you're saying that we were told we knew or was small, the Trump lawyers, we already knew about this, knew about what? Knew the lengths and the extent of a corporate, secret, lying, now federally convicted plot to mislead the American public, to hide things that which might have affected their vote, and do so in a manner that's already a convicted crime. That is bad for Donald Trump. That is not, as one lawyer put it outside the courthouse, boilerplate. If that's your boilerplate, throw your boilerplate out the window. You got a bad boilerplate case. You got a bad boilerplate life. It's not anyone's life, and it's not how elections are run. Now, the real Watergate had bigger things, obviously had Nixon in the White House as an incumbent, et cetera. But I do think that the key here, which they will present to a jury, is every crime, every lie, every intent was about stealing an election.
And the cover-up. I mean, someone close to the investigation said to me last week, it's not just about what he did ahead of the election to defraud the voters. It's about the cover-up that he conducted from inside the Oval Office. And those are the checks you put up. I think most of those were signed from inside the Oval.
Every alleged falsified business record described in the indictment and used as a basis of a charge happens while he is in his first year of his presidency.
And one more legal point that we all know, I mean, Nicole knows this from being on campaigns, we've all covered and been around them. You can't have a corporation come rent you a bus. Yes. You can't have a corporation just give $10K to you in public. Period. Full stop.
You can't donate water.
That's right.
Right. So this is a regulated space. Now, there are reasons, and I do think it will be interesting to litigate in the trial or in the pre-trial motions, how the feds stopped. And then the DA picked it up, and we discussed all that. But that doesn't stop a prosecution. It would appear that the DA here is acting, he says, to protect American elections.
Okay. Can I ask just a dumb technical question, just on because I think, let's just say these were charged as misdemeanors, okay? It seems like that case seems slam dunk. Okay, these are all just business, business
These are listed as legal fees. These are not legal fees. This is reimbursement for a different thing. Yes.
So, boom, these are misdemeanors, right? They're elevated to felony because they are with the intent to commit another crime, right? The crime of, he says, unlawfully or conspiring to unlawfully aid a candidate, right, is unlawful or a crime in New York law. I know this is a dumb technical question, but I just want to ask, is there a federal preemption problem? Is there a problem that, he is a candidate for federal office and not New York office with that theory? Does that make
not
sense?
According to the DA. I mean, reading from, again, this is right up top, page 1, paragraph 2. They say in writing election laws and lying for tax purposes. That's laws, plural. Right. Their theory of the case is that what enhances it, we've all had our crash course in New York law, what enhances it is more than one election crime. And then the DA today, as we've reported, spoke about examples of that. So that is their theory of the case. And also, Chris raises the point, if this were only misdemeanors, big if, yeah, in a different context, someone might plead out, avoid jail time. Yeah. But Mr. Weisselberg is in Rikers for these charges, falsifying business records and other fraud.
And Cohen went to wherever he went, Otisville. So.
All right, we got much more of our special recap on the arraignment and arrest of former President Donald Trump today. Stay with us.
Hi, I'm Dan Slepian, a longtime investigative producer with NBC News. In 2002, I received a letter from a New York State prison from a man serving 25 years to life for a murder he insisted he didn't commit.
Dear Mr. Slepian, I know I don't belong here, but I am a firm believer that everything that happens to us in life is for a purpose.
It ended with a desperate plea. Look into my case. I didn't know it then, but this letter would spark a 20-year journey to uncover the truth. And what I've learned haunts me. This is the story of a man convicted of murder, his fight for justice, and the letters that changed both of our lives. This is Letters from Sing Sing, a podcast from NBC News Studios. All episodes available now. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
Hi, I'm Tom Llamas, and for me, the news is so much more than a headline. It informs, it inspires, and it still matters. To cover it, you have to be in it. We'll take you to the front lines of the story, where it's actually happening, with NBC News journalists on the ground from all over the world. We cover what you need to know and bring your newsfeed to life. In primetime and streaming live, it's your news playlist. Join me for Top Story, weeknights at 7 Eastern on NBC News Now.
In today's arraignment of former President Donald Trump, one of the more interesting back and forths between both sides, attorneys for both sides and the judge, was about whether or not the judge might ever impose what's called a gag order, essentially restrictions on the speech of anybody involved in the case in the ways they talk about it. The judge said in the arraignment today, although I'm not going to issue a gag order and not something close to a gag order, meaning right now, I would encourage counsel on both sides to please speak to your witnesses. Defense counsel, speak to your client and anybody else you need to, and remind them to please refrain from making statements that are likely to incite violence or civil unrest. Please do not engage in words or conduct which jeopardizes the rule of law, particularly as it applies to these proceedings in this courtroom. Again, and then he reiterates, I ask you to please discuss that with your client. Tonight, Donald Trump just finished remarks at his home in Florida, in which he called the prosecutor investigating him in Georgia, Fani Willis, a racist. He called her a racist DA. He called Alvin Bragg, the prosecutor who has brought these charges against him in New York today, quote, a criminal. And he called Jack Smith, the special counsel who's investigating at the federal level, a, quote, lunatic bomb thrower. Judge today going out of his way to say, I'm not putting a gag order in place here. Of course, I don't believe I'll have to. We'll all be able to be constrained here. Tonight, calling the prosecutors an animal, a racist, and a lunatic bomb thrower. I don't know where that is going to end.
Yeah. I mean, the question, I guess, is what does it take to get a gag order? I remember Roger Stone making threatening noises at a judge and not getting sanctioned, really. And so I think Donald Trump has lived in a universe where his peeps have gotten away with it. That would be my question, is sort of what will it take?
Well, there was a gag order in the Roger Stone case, but that was a federal trial. And I was surprised to learn this. Catherine Christian was one of the people who sort of disabused me of my previous notions about this. But apparently in New York criminal cases, it's very hard to get a gag order.
Interesting.
More so than in federal cases, where there have been, like, for example, when Stone had threatened threatened that judge. So in this case, the judge is already warning, literally day one of the arraignment, warning that is very concerning language that's been out there. We saw the president and a member of his family today posting a photo of the judge's daughter. I mean, it's already very ugly. Not good. And so for him to get out there tonight, all guns blazing, proverbially speaking, it seems like that's going downhill fast.
Yeah, and Rachel, arraignments are usually under 10 minutes. One of the reasons this took so long was they had to put time in to deal with Donald Trump's threats. As you mentioned, the judge said all that. The judge said, look, I'm making this as a request. If I'm handed anything like this in the future, I'll have to take a closer look. Gag order, very hard, especially for all the First Amendment reasons. But you can be held in contempt of court. Another smaller item that Trump's lawyers lost today, they asked for him to not have to attend the next hearing. And the judge said, no. You have to come. And again, if you don't come in New York, they issue a bench warrant and people with guns from NYPD come get you. And that's why he had to be there today. He pretended that he's making his big trip, but this is all under compelled supervision of the court. And so I do think Trump will continue to test this. Georgia, there isn't an open case against him, so it's a little different. But in New York, if he goes too far, and I'm sure his lawyers have warned him this, there are proceedings. You could be held in prison for a day or longer.
All right, much more of our special coverage of the arrest and arraignment of the former president today. Alex Wagner is going to join us when we return. Stay with us. When Donald Trump announced recently that he believed he was about to be arrested imminently, that was more than 2 weeks ago, he told his supporters that they should respond by protesting. He said, quote, protest, take our nation back. They are killing our nation. We must save America. Protest, protest, protest. He has made those calls for protests repeatedly. About a week ago, he issued this dark warning. He said, quote, potential death and destruction would occur if he was indicted. He said it would be, quote, catastrophic for our country. He said, quote, our country is being destroyed as they tell us to be peaceful. Republican Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene joined the former president's calls for protests, announcing, quote, protesting is a constitutional right, and I'm going to New York on Tuesday to protest. We will not live in fear. Protest, protest, protest. The country is being destroyed. How could they tell us to be peaceful when the country is coming to an end? This is what it looked like today when Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene arrived outside the courthouse in downtown Manhattan for her promised protest. She got out of her big white car and was surrounded by a whole lot of security and news media. And then less than 10 minutes later, she was back in the car. And then she drove off as onlookers sort of shooed her away. The few people surrounding her car did tell her to get out of their city, but other than that, it was just kind of, she was there and then she wasn't. You see a lot of cameras, but as Lawrence O'Donnell was saying today, having seen it in person, lots more media than there were actual protesters, certainly than there were Trump supporters. This was the wide view outside the courthouse this morning. The crowd that was there numbered in the hundreds, including tons of journalists and tourists, according to New York's NBC station. Citing early police estimates, they report that the pro-Trump crowd outnumbered the anti-Trump crowd a little bit. You can see one Trump supporter there waving a flag. It might be hard to spot, but there's at least, a few MAGA hats you can see here and there, give or take. It's easier to see the television news crews in the foreground than it is easy to see anybody else. Also outside the courthouse, people were gathered in support of the indictment today. People with signs saying things like, we believe Stormy Daniels, and effectively just celebrating the indictment. But again, it was pretty sparse. You could see some pro-Trump protesters standing in front of a small group of counter-protesters, separated by a bike rack, a bit of flag and sign waving. I mean, we can walk through all the images that we've got, but the bottom line is nothing major to report, nothing massive. And that's sort of a dog that didn't bark story. But it becomes an important dog that didn't bark story when you consider that Trump was ordering his supporters that they better bark, that they better respond. And they just didn't. Our friend Alex Wagner joins us now here as part of this special coverage. Alex, I have to ask your impression of that part of this story. I mean, I don't know that anybody had like a down and dirty true prediction as to what would happen, but not much of anything happened.
Yeah, death and destruction or just really bad traffic.
Yeah.
I was struck by the sort of poetic irony of Trump, who is such a creature of New York City, being arrested, setting in motion the sort of wheels of history in New York City. And that New York City is the place where he's calling his people to amass, to show this force. And nothing happens. And for someone who has staked so much of his reputation on his ability to sort of be a master of the universe of this town, not even, in some ways more than Washington, D.C., this is the place that created Trump. And for him to come back to effectively his hometown for this moment, to demand that his people show up, and for it to be such a withering non-response. I wonder, on this day of days, I'm sure there were a lot of things running through his head. But, watching the car go down the highway, going down to Lower Manhattan. And, he knows this place like probably no other place in his life. To be so resoundingly rejected by the Big Apple has to pierce Trump's psyche in a way that maybe other things don't necessarily.
Reverend Sharpton talked about this, that, Donald Trump is a creature of New York City, but of Queens. And it was always like a thing that bothered him, that he didn't want to be the Queens developer like his dad. He wanted to make it in Manhattan. He buys the Bonwit Teller epic department store, where, by the way, my godmother used to work. She was one of the few black women who were allowed to be a clerk at Bonwit Teller. He rips down the beautiful artistic frescoes of Bonwit Teller, and the art community went crazy. They said this man is a heathen. He rips down this gorgeous artwork. He reconstructs it into this monstrosity. The architectural community said Trump Tower was a monstrosity. So he always felt this sense of rejection, that to your point, all he ever wanted was to make it in Manhattan. All he ever wanted was to have the New York Times write about him, be on the cover of Newsweek. These were his things. These were the
talismans of his life.
100%. And so there is a special indignity and I think a special humiliation to having to walk into that courthouse where the Central Park Five had to walk through. And while he's saying, kill him, put him to death, he has to walk in that same building with a black DA that he showers with disrespect, and he's in no control. The whole Manhattan myth of Trump. And the last thing I'll say is they filmed, The Apprentice in Trump Tower. But when I wrote my Trump book, one of the sort of facts that I found really fascinating was they took a conference room and they had to reno it. Because Trump Tower was still 80s old. It wasn't new. It wasn't fresh. It wasn't sparkly. It was all a lie. Everything about The Apprentice and him has always been a lie.
I think, though, that if you talk to domestic violent extremism experts, the parallel they draw is that, after 9/11, we were prepared to make sure no one ever got on an airplane with their shampoo ever again. But that wasn't what was planned, right? The face of international terrorism changed. After 1/6, the face of domestic violent extremism may have changed. And what security experts are more afraid of isn't necessarily another January 6th, but another storming of the FBI field office, which happened after Mar-a-Lago. And I think there's still, I sense a lot of anxiety about a lone wolf who watches the coverage or watched Trump's speech, which apparently was grievance-filled. Jesse Waters yesterday called DA Alvin Bragg a felon and suggested he self-indict, or reported that someone was calling on him to do that. Donald Trump Jr., while the judge was saying the things he was saying from the transcript you read, was disseminating pictures of the judge's daughter. They don't care. They don't care that they've been rejected in New York, because I think the truth is Donald Trump has command and control over a movement you understand very well, a militia movement and a group that has among its members, or associated or adjacent to them, people who could be prone to carry out acts inspired by domestic violent extremism.
I think the thing that is truly incendiary, though, in sort of the health of the democracy is when you get extremists, particularly armed extremists, wedded to people with real political power, right? And when you've got people with real political power who are willing to erase the distinction between run-of-the-mill electoral extremism and violent extremism, that's when you get a country that teeters on the edge of no longer potentially being a democracy. And in this case, I think what you were saying earlier about this being a regulated space and there being a judge that now gets something to say about what Trump is allowed to say and not say about the various actors in this case. And there's potential jail time penalties if he violates those. If we go in that direction with this case, that's a real test as to whether or not you can stay a mainstream figure with electoral sway while also playing footsie with fascism, while also encouraging the most violent extremists.
They're in tension like they've never been.
And there is real deterrence there. Everyone at this table has covered all the ways that our system doesn't work. And yet there's a sliver here, and it may be growing, of where the system is working. Because some of those extremists you mentioned were convicted. Sedition is a convicted crime here. Some people are serving long sentences, even as we cover others who got away. There has been talk about the old Donald Trump and some idea of Teflon. Well, anyone living in reality saw a lot of that Teflon stripped today, if it was ever there. And it was been long stripped from people like Weisselberg. He couldn't keep his money man out of Rikers. Even when he was president, there were a lot of people that, while later he tried to use the pardon power, his campaign chair, Manafort, went to prison. We know that. Bannon, you did a run through this the other night, Rachel, where that all stacks up. So when the pawns are getting in trouble and some of the other players on the board are in trouble, and then he can't amass this now this week, I think it continues to strip it away, where no, we're not documenting, we're not trying to cover arms race to another January 6th. And yet we are accurately covering that he threatened this, he warned this enough that he got in trouble today, but he doesn't have that. He doesn't have that support, partly because he's gotten so many people in so much trouble. And now, what is the ultimate indignity? Whether he's convicted or not, he's presumed innocent. Everyone can see, protect you. He can't even protect himself.
Yeah, that's right. And it's, I mean, at the end of the day, and we can talk about this in legal terms too, but at the end of the day, I think if you had to bet right now about where this is going to go, this is going to be, they're going to be back in court maybe in December. They're going to be on trial maybe next spring. It's going to go on, I don't know, for a couple of months maybe in terms of that trial. And at the end of it, if things go pretty poorly for him, maybe he'll get convicted and he'll pay a fine. And you know what I mean? Like, whoa, that's what's going to happen. Yeah. But over the course of that 2-year period, he's going to have to be in court all the time. They're going to be filing motions on his behalf. He's going to potentially be dealing with gag orders. He's going to be subject to the criminal justice system in all of its humbling specificity. And that is going to have the kind of effect that both of you guys are talking about.
But while he's campaigning, think about the fact that if he has a hearing in December, what if the first hearing is in January? When is Iowa and New Hampshire? That's around then. Is he going to be flying back and forth between, Des Moines and New York City to do? How does he keep his image of Teflon Don while he's having to be like, hold on, I'm going to let you finish with this campaign thing, but I need to fly to New York for this hearing in this case that I'm against. And then he's going to have to testify in the civil case. E. Jean Carroll's case is coming up. He's going to have to deal with that.
Next week, he's got the deposition in the $250 million civil fraud case that Letitia James has brought against him. That's next week. The week after that is the Fox News Dominion trial, which is going to be a week worth of testimony about how all the most famous right-wingers in the country think that he's a dork and secretly say it to each other. A demonic force. And then the week after that is the E. Jean Carroll trial in which he is accused both of rape and defamation.
And then it's May when there's the broad expectation that Fani Willis is going to issue an indictment for what happened down in Fulton County. I mean, the news is not good for him. And might I also say, his defense, or the defense that's been floated, and I'll point to you, Ari, by lawyers like Joe Tacopina, that Trump was making these payments not for his campaign, but to shield his family and to shield Melania. That was taken apart today. Like, the one line of defense that he has, Bragg cites effectively, Trump advised Cohen, I have it somewhere, basically, that they wanted to delay the Stormy Daniels payments until after the election because they could avoid paying them all together, because after the election, it didn't matter. Now, presumably, he thought Melania Trump and Barron Trump were going to be alive after the election, right? But it just lays out in very plain English this whole defense that's been floated by your lawyers?
Can I also
could be a joke?
There were two things about the Michael Cohen Stormy Daniels case that have always bothered me about it that never just made sense to me. One was, why did Michael Cohen get reimbursed $420,000 for a $130,000 payment? I never understood that before today. First of all, they doubled it because they thought he'd be in a 50% tax bracket, and they were going to list it as if it was income. And then second of all, they owed him another $50,000 for something else, and then there was something else.
A bonus,
and then he got his
$60,000 bonus.
$60,000. I was like, okay, so that's how you got $420,000.
Yes.
That's tax fraud. That's adorable.
Yeah.
So that's one. But also, why did it take Michael Cohen so long to make the payment to Stormy Daniels? Why was it delayed? Why was her lawyer threatening him? Why did they get to 12 days before the election? It wasn't because Michael Cohen was having a hard time taking out his home equity line of credit. It was because Trump said, delay it, delay it, delay it, because I'm about to lose this election.
Yes.
And after I lose this election, who cares what Stormy Daniels says?
The other thing is, why does the federal government immunize David Pecker? You don't need Pecker to put Cohen away.
Yeah.
You know, why do they amass all of this evidence? Why? And you see that Alvin Bragg made good use of it. I mean, he had all of them back before he indicted this case.
One of the things we're going to talk about with some of our legal guests when we come back is this question of how to make these falsified business records, allegedly falsified business records, into a felony. What the district attorney, Alvin Bragg, laid out today was a number of crimes that he said were committed in conjunction, essentially, with those falsified business records. None of those crimes are being charged, though. They're not charging the National Enquirer company with falsifying their business records. They're not charging anybody newly with federal campaign finance charges. They're not charging anybody with this New York conspiracy to get somebody elected based on unlawful means. None of those things are charged, but yet those are the felonies. Those are the keys, the other crimes that allow these charges to come up against Trump as felonies. Why is that? How does that work? We'll have that for you on the other side. Stay with us.
The indictment doesn't specify that because the law does not so require. In my remarks, I mentioned a couple of laws, which I will highlight again now. The first is New York State election law, which makes it a crime to conspire to promote a candidacy by unlawful means. I further indicated a number of unlawful means, including more additional false statements, including statements that were planned to be made to tax authorities. I also noted the federal election law cap on contribution limits. I'm not going to go into our deliberative process on what was brought. The charges that were brought were the ones that were brought. The evidence in the law is the basis for those decisions.
Ahead of the indictment today being brought against former President Donald Trump, we had it on pretty good authority. Everybody had pretty well surmised that there were going to be multiple charges related to falsified business records. But we all learned in crash course cable TV law school that in addition to those charges, there needed to be something that made those charges into a felony. On their own terms, those things would just be misdemeanors. Those things would not likely, therefore, result in Donald Trump being indicted. If he was going to be indicted, those falsified business records would have to be linked to the attempt to commit or conceal some other crime. Today, we found out what the other crimes would be, except those crimes aren't charged today. We saw Alvin Bragg just run through them briefly in his remarks when he was answering questions today from reporters. He said under New York State election law, it's a crime to conspire to promote a candidacy by unlawful means. He described additional false business records charges, not the ones that were charged against Trump today, but additional false business records that were allegedly carried out by the company that owns the National Enquirer. He also described federal election law caps on contributions. Again, those were not charged today, but he cited those crimes as being essentially the aggravating factor that made the charges against Trump today into felonies. How does that work if those crimes he described today were not actually themselves charged? I put this question to two of our legal experts who are here with us today, Catherine Christian and Andrew Weissman, both of them veteran prosecutors who've seen this both from a federal and a state perspective. Can either of you walk us non-lawyers through this part of these charges?
You want me to take a crack?
You go ahead.
Okay. So the first thing to know is that the statute in New York that says you can bump this up to a felony requires that you have an intent to commit some other crime. You don't actually have to commit that crime. So that's why you wouldn't necessarily need to charge it, and that's something that Alvin Bragg said. Also, if one of the crimes that you're thinking can be used as that bump up is a federal crime, then that is not something that you could charge in state court anyway. Now, this really goes to Chris's question in the last segment, where he sort of said, isn't this really still a tenuous case? Isn't there a problem? Because this is really a legal issue in this case more than a factual issue. And this is where I actually was impressed in terms of what was charged here, because there's so many different ways in which the DA has laid out how he can get to a felony. He has suggested in his oral remarks that one way is the federal campaign laws. Another way is the state campaign laws. A third way is he talked about AMI issuing false statements, and that this was in furtherance of those false statements. And a fourth way was tax charges, exactly what you had laid out, Rachel, in terms of the scheme to have Michael Cohen commit tax fraud. Which, by the way, is exactly the kind of thing that was alleged in the Trump Organization Weisselberg case that just resulted in convictions in November. So those give the DA a lot of room. So even if there's an attack on one or two of them, particularly the state crimes of tax fraud and the AMI false statement charge seem very solid. It seems very hard to imagine a motion to dismiss that's going to knock out all of that and reduce all of the charges to misdemeanors.
And it doesn't mean that when you describe, Andrew, the district attorney as having laid out a lot of different paths by which he can get to a felony, sometimes, like when you see that in a movie script or something, you think, oh, they've given you a whole bunch of different options because they don't have one good, strong one. But in this case, you're saying that's not a sign of weakness, that's a sign of strength of the case, because even if one of them gets knocked out, they've still got other viable means.
Yeah, absolutely. That when I would charge, and I'm sure when Catherine charged, if you have a really weak one, you don't want to do that and have it sort of taint all of the other ones. But if you have like four really good options, lay them all out. The defense is entitled to make motions and you never know what a judge is going to do. That's the reason you lay out your strongest ones. And here, there are just too many options that I'm sure when the defense looked at this, they were actually thinking this is more than we had sort of bargained for.
Catherine, let me just ask you to expand on what Andrew has said there, especially his point about how you don't necessarily have to charge the crime that would bump this up to a felony. You just have to show that there was an intent to commit that crime, whether or not it was in fact committed, whether or not it is in fact charged. Again, that's for those of us who aren't lawyers, that can be a little bit hard to wrap your head around. If there's an intent to commit a crime or an effort to commit a crime, why isn't that charged behavior?
Yeah, well, as DA Bragg just said, we didn't charge it because the law doesn't require us to do it. The statute reads, people also always forget, you still also have to prove the intent to defraud and then the intent to commit or conceal another crime. So as Andrew said, it doesn't say that you intend to defraud and you committed another crime. So, and Andrew is right. The New York State election law, the federal campaign law, if that was all it was based on, then it really makes it a really difficult case. But the tax fraud and the AMI false statements, that makes it I'm not going to say a rock solid case, but you can understand why this case was presented and why the DA's office believes they have proof beyond a reasonable doubt. And because the jury can believe, okay, forget the New York State election law, but tax fraud and those false statements by AMI.
And on the tax fraud issue, again, what they said today was Michael Cohen paid Stormy Daniels $130,000. He got paid back way more than that because they put a whole bunch of other stuff on it. But one of the reasons they plussed him up and gave him lots more money back, not just a straight $130,000 reimbursement, is because they wanted him to net out $130,000 after this was put on his income taxes as income. Do they actually have to prove that he did book it that way with tax authorities, that he did actually claim it as income falsely on his tax returns in order to get there? Or do they just have to show that that was the rationale for why they structured the payment the way they did, whether or not he eventually submitted false paperwork to the tax authorities?
Andrew wrote on this, so I'm going to let him take the lead.
Okay.
So the answer is that you don't have to show that it actually happened. Imagine, for instance, Rachel, if Michael Cohen was arrested in the middle of the scheme. You wouldn't be able to say, okay, I had this intent to do it, but because I didn't actually carry it out, I can't be sort of charged with a felony if they can show that you had that intent. Of course, if you actually did it, that's going to be very good proof that you had the intent to do it, but it's not actually necessary. And in this case, there actually is reason to think that, for instance, the Trump organization and Donald Trump himself might have wanted to deduct the, quote, legal fees as expenses, but right, and so that would be tax fraud. But there's a reason to think that he didn't do that because he became the president, and there was a lot of things that weren't done at that point, as was shown in the Trump organization trial this past fall, where basically the accountants turned to them and said, you know what, we're going to be under a lot more scrutiny, so the stuff that we've been doing, well, let's just stop for now.
Ari, I feel like we talked early on about how the falsified documents part of this is something you can put on TV in one full screen image, and you can see all the false documents and you know that they're false. That's very easy to understand. Getting that explanation from Catherine and Andrew makes me feel like, okay, the other part of this, why is this a felony? What are the other crimes this is connected to? That feels very explicable, very straightforward now, too. How do you feel about the overall strength of this case?
I would call it medium high, not completely high. A prosecutor would like more precedent. You'd like more precedent on the books. But then again,
meaning just more cases like this that have previously been prosecuted.
More cases like this, I think, would just be generally helpful. Prosecutors like that. But Donald Trump, we should all remember, is fairly unprecedented. These type of schemes are not habitually pursued, so that is what it is. The other point that I think is great about the news, we love learning new things. We know a lot more tonight than we knew last night. Now we know, based on this theory of the case, why they didn't charge a conspiracy. Because while a conspiracy sounds big and bad, it, as our veterans there just explained, our prosecutors, raises the number of things you have to prove. And now we may know why Mr. Pomerantz and others who were under the previous DA's leadership there, under Vance, and had an initial clash with the current DA, Bragg, why they were so unhappy. They were doing a big swing and big stuff. And Mr. Pomerantz's book says that. We've had him on MSNBC. He didn't win the day on that. What we have here, and this is why I'm medium high, not medium low, is what we might call a winnable, moderate style case. It does not throw the entire kitchen sink of everything Donald Trump might have done in New York. It doesn't even deeply pull in the indicted Trump organization, which some lawyers would be tempted to try, but with the CFO Weisselberg not testifying against him and available as a defense witness to say, yeah, everything at Trump Org happened without Trump. You know how Trump Org is. We went rogue. Well, that's not a thing they really wanted to do. So they didn't do conspiracy. They didn't do a ton of Trump org. And as our prosecutors remind us, they did this phrase. I mean, I highlighted it the moment we got this news today, tax purposes, right? And you mentioned it earlier, Rachel. There's a lot of evidence all around Donald Trump that they habitually intend to lie. The fact that sometimes those lies don't reach the governing tax authority may not bail them out or be all that sympathetic a sounding argument to a New York jury.
Right, and in this case, the intent to essentially make false representations to tax authorities was apparently annotated in a handwritten notation by the Trump Organization CFO, written on a bank statement that they have. Well, and you taking notes on a criminal conspiracy? Sorry.
That's how we do it in Trump work. Two things. One thing Andrew Weissman said in the earlier hour, which is, we may not want to just suggest that the broader investigation into the Trump Organization is over. First of all, the DA has suggested it's not over.
Sure. Right.
Second of all, the timing on this is curious, right? December. Could it be that they're buying themselves enough time to get the rest of the case, the broader case against Trump Org, in line? Alan Weisselberg, who is really the linchpin to all of this, gets out of Rikers 2 weeks from tomorrow. We know 5 days ago he retained new counsel because Trump Org was not happy with the counsel that he had thus far, Nicholas Gravanti. He is now being represented by a different Trump paid-for lawyer. which is to say, in plain English, the lawyer that he has retained is being paid for by the Trump organization. They are clearly worried about Weisselberg being, pressured to testify maybe in future or ongoing investigations. So I think, there's a statute of limitations piece here that I think dictates some of the timing, right? In terms of this piece of Trump's wrongdoing, but the broader fraud that may have taken place, the bigger Cy Vance, the case with its origins at Cy Vance's office, that may not be over in under the stewardship of Alvin Bragg. And the great Andrew Weissman said on air that it might not be over. So I listened to him, and I think that the key players in this are maybe not done testifying.
I think the thing that is in conflict over and over and over again, and I think Alvin Bragg made 2 points that stuck in my head and inform how we cover this moving forward. One, we bring cases like this all the time. But to your point, Trump is such a different animal. He is both corrupt and cheap. And so when you read through this, you see those things clashing, right? Yeah. You see AMI doing these corrupt things. You hear Trump saying, wait it out. And of course, Melania is still going to be alive. So of course, Joe Tacopina sounds like a clown with that defense. But these things are in constant, violent contradiction, that he's so cheap. I'm not paying any more hush money than he's got to. Oh, but he really needs to cheat to win. I mean, these two things in the Trump story.
He makes his lawyer take out a home equity line of credit in order to pay the hush money.
It's so cheap. So it's this cheap cheesiness that's embodied by how he's doing it. Yeah. And it's his brazen corruption that Mary McCord made this statement that just sort of haunts me, that Alvin Bragg's framing is this broad and violent assault on our democracy, this fraud carried out. I worked on campaigns. August 15th, before an election, to November, is sort of this sacred space. It's why they don't bring charges against candidates, because it's sort of this safe space. But it's when Trump was getting down and dirty. Yeah. It's when he rolled in his National Enquirer bros. It's when he has Cohen take out his cheesy home equity loan. It's the crime Rudy confessed to on Sean Hannity. I mean, it's all so tawdry. It may be exactly why Merrick Garland and Lisa Monaco said, ew. Yeah. But it is so brazenly and plainly criminal that it makes sense to even the non-lawyers.
The noblest experiments in human governance can be brought down by the stupidest, tawdriest, most embarrassing things of all.
That.
Children. All right, we'll be right back. Stay with us. More to come. Despite leaking that he would speak before his arrest and arraignment, or maybe after his arrest and arraignment.
Or maybe during.
Or maybe during his arrest and arraignment, thus ensuring that the cameras would be on him all day. The former president today did not speak publicly either before or after his arrest and arraignment. From the transcript of the closed-door arraignment, we do know that he briefly spoke in court, but only to say things like, "Not guilty, Your Honor." That said, the former president did give a speech tonight when he was back home in Florida. And as expected, he spent much of that speech attacking the various prosecutors who are investigating him or now outright indicting him. As I said, we did kind of expect that. However, I wonder if he surprised his lawyers when, at that same speech this evening, he started talking loosely about the documents that he brought with him from the White House that he wasn't supposed to take to his private residence. Why did he bring that up? Joining us now from Mar-a-Lago is NBC News correspondent Vaughn Hilliard, who has been there to see the whole thing. Vaughn, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, good evening, guys. Look, you're looking at a situation with Donald Trump has a litany of lawyers working on all these various cases. Boris Epstein is his lead counsel coordinator here, who has been traveling with him to New York. And he came back down here to Florida. But as it pertains particularly to the documents case, I think it's a prime example of, for Donald Trump, for so many of these cases, it's not even necessarily of a denial of the alleged crimes or the actions, but more so it's on the basis of the merits. When it pertains to the documents case, tonight his quote from the stage here was, quote, "As president, I have the right to declassify documents, and the process is automatic if I take them with me." Of course, all of this is going to go if, in the case of the documents case, he were to be indicted. But each of the statements that he makes up on the stage, on the campaign trail, in the weeks and the months ahead, you could expect to be a part of any trial on any of these cases here. And I think that the one prevailing line that I walk away with tonight was this from Donald Trump. It was, quote, "Our justice system has become lawless." Again, I'll say it. Our justice system has become lawless. And I think important part of my job now in year number 8 of covering Donald Trump politically, is how his words up on a stage ultimately make it down to the American people level here. And over the course of these 8 years, we have seen him undercut Americans' trust in the media. And we've seen over the last 8 years him undercut the trust in America's intelligence agencies. We've seen him undercut Americans' trust in our elections. And then to hear that tonight, this is now an effort to undercut Americans' trust in the justice system. When you talked about the district attorney in Manhattan, District Attorney Alvin Bragg, tonight he said, quote, "The criminal is the district attorney. He should resign." When talking about the judge overseeing this case, Juan Merchan, he said, quote, "This is where we are right now. I have a Trump-hating judge with a Trump-hating wife." This is the same playbook we have seen over the course of the 8 years. And every single one of those individuals who has investigated him, attempted to prosecute him, or judges that have overseen various cases, he has gone to this idea and this concept of this being a witch hunt here. But he also took on Fani Willis, the Fulton County district attorney, suggesting she's doing whatever she can to indict him. Called Letitia James a racist. Jack Smith called him a lunatic. This comes all just 1 week after he suggested and proposed that each of these individuals should be ousted from their positions. For Donald Trump, well, the words that he says from these stages, they do hit the at the level on the ground, in which going to Waco, Texas last weekend with him, these are echoed from folks on the ground. I think it's important, the difference here and the distinction. He did not speak in the courtroom here today. And in so many ways, the campaign stage is the one place where he does have control of that microphone. And there is no judge overseeing him. And until there is a gag order in place, we should expect Donald Trump to continue to play offense, because that's the only game that he has ever seemed to play.
Well, to that point, I mean, there isn't, as you say, Vaughn, there isn't a gag order today, but we did see the judge entertain that at length and substantively at the arraignment today, which is an unusual thing to come up at the, first instances, right, at the arraignment. Was there any sense, and as you say, you've been covering Trump for a very long time, in which that seemed to loom a little bit for him? Because if he is hit with a gag order in this case, which the judge explicitly said today is possible, if the kind of rhetoric that he said he found concerning continues, then Trump will be constrained by law from being able to say those kinds of things about prosecutors and judges and prosecutors' family members and judges' family members. And if he does go too far, he will face consequences for that for the first time in his life. Does that seem to have loomed for him at all or inflected at all the kind of emphasis he put on those very controversial points?
Right. There was no direct suggestion of potential death and destruction today or years of hatred, chaos, and turmoil ahead. And so I guess that's where the question comes down to. When you're taking personal attacks at individuals, at prosecutors, at district attorneys, to what extent does that parlay into the suggestion to the American people that these people, that there should be direct efforts to take them on in whatever context that means? I mean, I was out there on the Capitol or on the West Front of the U.S. Capitol on January 6th. And I can tell you from conversations that day and conversations since, there are folks that are galvanized and follow his lead. And for Donald Trump here, he is not naive to that. And that's also why you see the likes of Ron DeSantis and Mike Pence coming to his defense here, because they understand that the Republican base of support in this Republican Party today is living in a reality that is listening to OAN, Newsmax, Right Side Broadcasting, and the speech that those millions of folks heard tonight here and the commentary that followed it is a very different reality and juxtaposition of where our country finds itself, where our election system finds itself, where our intelligence agencies are directed, where our justice system is. They're living in the perception of our American federal government and state governments today here is a very different one than the conversation we have been having over these last hours.
NBC News correspondent Vaughn Hilliard. Vaughn, covering President Trump tonight at Mar-a-Lago. Really invaluable to have you there for us, Vaughn. Thank you. Much appreciated. Coming into our conversation now is our friend Steph Rule. Steph, you seem fired up about this. You're frustrated about how this has been covered today, or how people have been reacting to it, or what you saw from the defense counsel today, or what you saw from the media. What you are agitated.
For me, it's always about the same thing. Follow the money.
Yeah.
And right-wing media has been saying scandal after scandal. This is great for Trump. It is never great for Trump politically. Remember the first impeachment? That didn't win him back into the White House. Remember the Mar-a-Lago search? That didn't win the midterms. And here we are again. This isn't a win for Donald Trump. It's a win in one place and one place only. fundraising. And it's what he does consistently. Since this indictment was announced, according to his campaign, he's raised $8 million. In the last 24 hours, in the motorcade on the way to the airport, he's on Truth Social, send me a check. First thing this morning, this is my last email before I'm arrested. And then as he entered the DA's office to get fingerprinted, his campaign sends out an email. You send us a check and you will get a T-shirt with Donald Trump's mugshot, which doesn't exist because he didn't get one. And so over and over and over, this is always about the grift and fundraising. His lawyer, Joe Tacopina, who should be focused on the case, gets right in front of the cameras and says he's raising more money than ever. So it's eye on the ball. There's one thing that has always been his focus, making money for himself, and that's what he's doing here.
But I sort of, don't you feel like that's like his fallback position? He's like, I'm being arrested. Well, what can I do? Right? I mean, because what you can do is
it's his side hustle.
You can convert it into fundraising, but ultimately ask Jeb Bush what it means to raise the most money in a Republican presidential primary. You know what I mean? He had to put an exclamation point on his name in that primary, but the $100 million he had before anybody else didn't help him. Well, I mean, the fundraising, I think, it's a fallback position for him, but I don't think it helps him get out of the hole he's in.
It's a shiny ball, though, for them. I mean, it's like a look over here. It's the thing. And frankly, after January 6th, he raised a lot of money, too, and he didn't stay in office. If the number were 7 or 70 million, I don't know that I would have cared either way. To your point, what difference does it make? There are also laws. I mean, I asked Phil Lofgren this yesterday. I mean, he's raising money for his campaign. He hasn't branded it a legal defense fund yet. But you can't spend that money on Tacopina. I mean, there are like laws
that money
by the way,
that they raised. Right. That's the same. Think about all that money he raised for his election defense fund. And then the January 6th committee found there was no official election defense fund. It went to Trump's PAC.
Correct. That's right. It was just a fundraising term.
Go ahead. I was just going to say, to me, it feels like it's for Trump's benefit. I mean, the
for his feelings.
He's going after Ron DeSantis. The polling is his strength in the Republican Party. He has support among the Republican Party. But he knows his stock is on the decline. He knows what is ahead of him this month and next month and through the rest of the summer, right? I think Trump touting the numbers, the fundraising appeals, Tacopina coming out there and talking the numbers is as much for Donald Trump to feel like he still matters as it is anything else.
But it is to continue to cow a party that it is shocking to understand that throughout all of the things that we've talked about, the multiple cases, the rape allegation case that he's got, there are 2 women who are going to get on the stand and testify about alleged sexual assaults. The fact that he might have to testify, all the travails that are coming up when it comes to the documents case, whatever happens in Georgia, his party hears those numbers. They see that little freak show in front of the prosecutor's office.
It
was little, but it was they are cowed. It is, to me, the greatest shock. They are cowed by this guy.
But Joy, I mean, that's the haunting aspect of what Vaughn just reported. Because what they saw on the networks he listed, I mean, we're like sort of post-Fox driving what they see. And I wonder if on OAN they saw what actually happened. You know, that 11 people who were screaming at Lawrence O'Donnell about his, I can't even say it again. It goes to what Vaughn's reporting, that we're in this post-reality universe, that Trump has gone from what is worthy of recrimination, being covered wall to wall by the mainstream media in 2015 and 16, to being covered by this post-Fox fringe that is representing something that didn't even happen.
And they can never win elections.
But there is something that is grounding about the legal process here, right? I mean, ultimately, January 6th happened, and they have revisionist history about January 6th, and they're playing the January 6th choir and talking about them as martyrs and all this stuff. But you know what? 1,000 people got prosecuted and hundreds of people went to jail. And those people's lives are forever changed. And that has inflected, I think, the degree to which Trump supporters are willing to go out and do the kinds of things he's asking them to do.
In New York, you saw thousands of children and teenagers protesting in Nashville yesterday, asking for common sense gun laws. But here in New York City, you didn't see the shaman.
Even when Trump demanded it. And there is something that's going on with Trump now, where we've got this alternate reality. Like as Vaughn was saying, people are hearing him talk about the classified documents case in a way that's supposed to make them think X about it. Right. Well, that's sort of fine. unless and until the classified documents case ends up adjudicated in a court of law, in which case your bumper sticker is not admissible. Right? These things only exist so far in terms of competing narratives about the way we understand the world until they get tested in a court of law where the rule is evidence. Yeah. And that has a normalizing effect. It has it grounds things in reality by default. And that's the process that we're in now with Trump for the first time.
And it makes it so nuts that, again, Alvin Bragg and Fani Willis are having to go first. I mean, it makes the vacuum created by DOJ not looking at his conduct specifically after January 6th until well after the Mar-a-Lago investigation is roaring along. Yeah. Because you're right. It's all in with the Republican Party breaking bad and not serving as a braking system. You know, Mitch McConnell thinks he's a criminal because he gave a speech on the floor of the Senate saying, I won't vote to indict, but the criminal justice system is there, wink, wink. I mean, we know what Republicans actually think of him. I can't imagine there were many elected Republicans, if any. Right.
It is amazing to me that on the 55th anniversary of Dr. King's murder, that these two black prosecutors might have to redeem the soul of America when it comes to Donald Trump.
And bear the brunt of it.
And bear the brunt of it, bear the security risk, bear the sort of risk of their reputations, that they have to take this all on in two states, in New York and in Georgia, when it is the literal job of our federal government to protect our federal elections. I think it is a scandal on the Justice Department that this has become the job of Alvin Bragg and of Fani Willis. It is a stain on the Justice Department. They're supposed to protect our federal elections. It is their literal job.
The Justice Department role here started with SDNY, as Nicole was arguing earlier, investigating the case that resulted in Michael Cohen going to prison. That's right.
And Pecker getting immunity.
And Pecker getting immunity, absolutely. And the Justice Department in that case put Michael Cohen in prison. They got him to allocute in court. They get an allocution in court saying, I did this for Donald Trump. Yes. He is individual one. This was committed with him for his benefit. And then nothing. And we know from Jeffrey Berman's book, he was U.S. attorney at the time, he said the Trump main justice appointees came in and sat on us and said, you cannot investigate this any further. You cannot do it. And then after Trump left office and those appointees were no longer there, SDNY just decided to cruise away from that oil spill and hope the shorebirds would take care of it. I'm sorry. Like, they didn't even put down boom to contain that mess. Like, they just kept cruising away. I mean, literally, the U.S. attorney for SDNY wrote a book saying this was corrupt. This was corrupt. This was wrong. And we just left it there.
That's it.
And now we're seeing, as you say, Alvin Bragg. We're seeing Fani Willis. We're seeing Tish James. We're seeing these other prosecutors who shouldn't have to bear this brunt picking up little pieces of it because DOJ and SDNY dropped it, while SDNY and DOJ are feeling very smug about how independent and they are and how much they are, do these things without fear or favor. And it's a shonda.
Well, what happens between today and December 3rd, the next time they're back in the courthouse? A lot is going to happen political, right? Everyone who's going, all right, the wheels are in motion. It's happening. I'll see it in December, right? That's a long way from today.
Yeah. And in between then, the people who have to get personal security for their family, for their daughters, for their sons, are these local prosecutors who don't have the Secret Service, who don't have the federal protection that those folks in the DOJ have, and who don't have the federal protection Donald Trump has. And the havoc that he could wreak, to the point you made earlier, Alex, it's not going to be in Manhattan. New Yorkers don't play those games. Just try that. They got to get to work. They will run you over with their high heels. It ain't happening here. Well, but it's going to happen. I mean, think about it. When the documents case happened, it was local FBI field offices that were getting the death threats. It's the people outside of New York City and this bubble that are at risk, because that little speech he gave that they're going to see on OANN, it's not going to affect people here. It's going to affect people we don't even know where, and we don't know how, and we don't know what power he still has over them. But we know he has some power over a lot of people.
I'm going to interject here for a second, and I'm actually sort of calling an audible here. I need to speak to the control room and ask you, live on TV, can I report this breaking news? All right. NBC News has breaking news, which I can now bring to you. I'm sorry, I needed to confirm that. If the answer had been no, that would have been a real cliffhanger. NBC News has projected a result in the very important Wisconsin Supreme Court election tonight. Janet Protasiewicz is the more liberal of the two candidates. Dan Kelly, the more conservative of the two candidates. This is considered broadly to be the most important election in the country, the most consequential election in the country in the year 2023. As you see with these elections here, the projected winner is Janet Protasiewicz, the more liberal of the two judicial candidates here. This has very big consequences for Wisconsin and indeed for the country. I will just point out a couple of things here. This may very well mean that there is a deciding vote in the Wisconsin Supreme Court that results in abortion being legal in Wisconsin instead of illegal. It also means that Wisconsin, which is arguably the most gerrymandered state in the country, may finally get what are considered to be fair maps rather than radical Republican maps. I will also say that the Wisconsin Supreme Court is the one Supreme Court in the nation that agreed to hear Donald Trump's challenges to the 2020 election, and it was only by one vote that they refused his demand to throw out hundreds of thousands of votes in Democratic cities in Wisconsin, thereby giving him that state's election result when he had not, in fact, won it. And now the majority on the Wisconsin Supreme Court, for the first time in more than a decade, will flip from hard right conservative control to progressive control. That is a huge deal in Wisconsin.
Especially on the maps front. Look what happened over in Michigan when they started using actually representative maps. Same thing might happen in this great state of Wisconsin, which would dramatically change the makeup of
right now, Wisconsin, I mean, forgive me, you know this better than I do, Alex, but Wisconsin, in terms of the popular votes, roughly 50-50 Democratic and Republican. But if the population in Wisconsin votes that way, what they get, because their maps are so crazy, is basically a 2/3, 1/3 Republican majority, both in their state legislature, but also in their congressional delegation. And so if Wisconsin gets fair maps that actually represent the way people vote in Wisconsin, it could flip multiple seats in Congress. It could flip control of Congress simply by this one result in this one Supreme Court seat in this one election in Wisconsin tonight.
And that basically happened in Florida, right? In the other direction. Illegal maps were used essentially to flip the Congress to the Republicans.
The maps matter. In short, the maps matter. And by the way, it's nice that this is, national breaking news, because there was a moment 10, 15 years ago when people were not tuned into why these things matter. And now the country, I think, has really woken up and is turning out. That's a big margin. I think it was 14 points. I don't want to say that officially.
I mean, it's not, we're not at the end of it, but she is the projected winner.
And that abortion in Roe is not this flash in the pan issue that waxed and waned when the opinion leaked, that it is an enduring fracture, that a majority of Americans still have that front of mind when they make decisions about who should win elections.
And I would argue that Democrats need to rethink everything that they understood about politics from the 1990s. Guns and abortion are the issues that are probably the two most powerful electoral issues. And if you don't believe that, look at what happened in the 2020 midterms when abortion, I still believe, and will fight me, I believe abortion was the deciding factor in that election. And if you look at Tennessee, the next abortion level issue is guns.
That's going to do it for this portion of MSNBC's special coverage on this historic night. I want to thank Joy Reid for the very long day, and Nicole Wallace for the super, super long day, and Alex Wagner and Stephanie Rule. You still have a show to do tonight at 11 Eastern. We got lots to go, lots to go, lots to go. Now it's time to hand the wheel to our colleague, Lawrence O'Donnell.